everyone, and welcome back to lecture. This is our first lecture for the final unit of the semester. Today we're going to be focusing on reentry issues for returning jail and prison inmates. This is probably going to be the most important lecture of the semester for you all, and probably the one that we should be the most focused on really as a society. Reentering inmates have just spent a considerable amount of time being incarcerated and locked away from the outside world, where their every move has been dictated for the past however many years. Think about what it would be like if someone told you when to eat and when to shower and when to sleep and when you're allowed to have the lights turned on and when you can make a phone call. If that was your life for the last 15 years, and now you're sent back to the outside world, which has continued to progress even though the world has stopped for you, it would be a massive shock for you to just try and order a meal at a drive-thru. But reentry services have to be implemented in order for the inmate to have a shot at staying on the outside without recidivating out of desperation. We're going to cover a lot of information, some of which you may have already encountered since last week you all submitted your group projects and you watched the final videos online. So, reentry occurs after the inmate is released from incarceration, either because the sentence is complete or the offender has been released on parole. Either way, it is the process through which the offender is trying to reintegrate into the community that he or she has left behind. The offender is possibly reunited with family and friends, or is having to go through their reentry process all on their own. Most inmates are returning to low-income areas and have the odds stacked against them. Many are undereducated after the first 3 years of incarceration. Friends and family might abandon you due to the nature of your crime. If you are in prison for long enough, then your loved ones might even pass away while you're incarcerated. Then you don't have anyone to return home to. But even if you do have a support system, you've been away for X number of years, and that amount of time apart does actually put a large strain on your relationships. Most inmates are not prepared for life on the outside. Many only get their initial possessions back, maybe $100 or so, and a bus ticket somewhere. That's what the state provides to inmates who are trying to re-enter society. Many of them do not get the medications if they need them, or if they're lucky enough, then the state might give them a week's supply of their medications. But 7 days of meds does not mean that you're getting adequate health care coverage in a week to be able to pay for your meds and your doctor's visits in the future. Because these inmates are often woefully unprepared, they are really more likely to get scared and they panic and then they commit another crime, which sends them right back to jail to start the whole process over again. But if the state were to provide some sort of help post-release, then they could correct this problem. For every $1 we invest in reentry programs and services, we end up saving about $35 because then inmates have a better shot of staying on the outside. However, most reentry budgets come from, in part really, from taxpayer dollars. Many taxpayers are not interested in helping reentering inmates. Here's the thing. Even though people don't want to pay for these reentry services, the inmates are coming home regardless. We have to be concerned about reentry because these are offenders who are coming home. Most of them do not receive sentences that keep them in prison for the rest of their lives. This means that about 90% of inmates are returning to their communities at some point in time. They're also coming home in droves. Roughly 650,000 people a year is a huge amount of people who are coming back and are having to deal with all of the issues that we are talking about here. But because reentry is so difficult, many of them do not succeed and will be arrested within 3 years of release. The first 6 months post-release are the most crucial. If you can get past the first 6 months, then the likelihood of you being arrested again goes down a little bit for each day the longer that you are out. This should be the most concerning chart that I show to you this entire semester. This shows the revolving door theory 100%. Some of these individuals are those who cannot control themselves and are just chronic offenders. But for many, it is a problem regarding reentry efforts and trying to comply with their conditional release, if they're on conditional release. But this slide shows that many inmates are being admitted at about the exact same rate that they are being released. This means that as they leave, they're coming right back in. That's a massive problem. At this point, I'm going to direct you to another John Oliver clip that I have posted on Blackboard. At this point, you're probably thinking that John Oliver has basically taught this class for you, but it is so awesome that a mainstream comic is bringing to light some of the major issues that we keep discussing throughout the semester. I promise there aren't too many more of these that you're going to watch. He's running out of commentary. But this video talks about some of the largest reentry hurdles that offenders are up against. Housing, employment, and maintaining community ties, for instance. John Oliver also interviews a reentering offender who has worked very hard to shed the inmate status. This video is on Blackboard, so watch it and enjoy. I want to switch gears a little bit and introduce or review a little bit of theory with you all. For those of you who have already taken criminology, then this should sound familiar to you. Braithwaite's reintegrative shaming theory is perfect to integrate into the discussion of reentry. Braithwaite suggests that when offenders come home, there are two ways in which we interact with them. We either accept them or we ostracize them. If we choose to ostracize them, then this becomes problematic. It becomes an us versus them mentality, and this can often lead to more deviance and crime. Individuals react and even act out when they are excluded from social acceptance. There are two main types of shaming. One is healthy and one is unhealthy. Disintegrative shaming, this is the unhealthy type of shaming that keeps groups that are distanced from one another. The offender is not welcomed back into the community and is often kept separate. You are only viewing the offender as an offender, rather than someone who may have made a mistake somewhere along the line. You do not believe that the offender can change, or you don't believe that they're deserving of a second chance. This is the unhealthy form of shaming. On the healthy side of things, reintegrative shaming brings the offender back into the fold. They have served their prison sentence and have been punished accordingly. Now it is time to let it go, to put it behind us, and to move forward, allowing the offender a chance to redeem himself. There is no us versus them. We are once again a collective. By not ostracizing the offender, you can stop viewing him as an offender and the label is removed. Punishing the offense, but recognizing that the offender and the offense are two separate things here. One of the best examples of shaming in effect is the use of residency restrictions for registered sex offenders. Residency restrictions do not affect everyone and are largely put in place for those offenders who may have committed an offense against a child. Different states also have different versions of this concept, but mostly the restrictions are somewhere between 1,000 and 2,500 feet, depending on the state or county ordinance that you're talking about. But mainly, these restrictions are limiting where sex offenders can live, depending on their proximity in terms of nearness to areas to where children congregate. So I want to show you a few maps here. The first one is of Plano, Texas. Each one of these dots shows a 1,000-foot boundary around a school, a playground, a bus stop, a daycare. Remember, anywhere that children are frequent, then sex offenders cannot be there. Remember, this is only if the victim is younger than 17. This doesn't look too bad. Yes, arguably there are a lot of red dots, but there's also a lot of gray on the screen as well. It looks as though there would be plenty of housing for offenders to find a place to reside. Other places are a little bit different. This is a map of Brooklyn, New York. There is a lot more peach than there is green. As you can see from this map, only the green areas are where the sex offenders are allowed to reside. All of the purple and red and orange and blue dots are exclusionary zones surrounding either a daycare or an after-school program or a school or a park facility. New York law states that any sex offender on probation or parole supervision is subjected to the restrictions in whatever area you're in. This specific map refers to level 1 or low-risk offenders. This does not necessarily pertain to level 2 or level 3, who are medium and high-risk offenders respectively. Those individuals have permanent boundaries. The areas that do not have any color on them are either industrial, meaning that they're non-residential, or they are state parks where no one is allowed to live to begin with. So in very highly populated urban areas like New York City, you have less available area to live in compared to a more spread out suburban type of area like Plano. Then we have the granddaddy of them all, Miami, Florida. This is a map of Miami and Miami Beach. This map actually shows a couple different ways that allow motorists to take over the intercoastal in order to get to the beach from Miami proper. You can take either A1A or you can take 112, which is otherwise known as the Julia Tuttle Causeway. This is an alternate view. It's a satellite view of the same area we just looked at. This picture shows the causeway itself. On the left is Miami proper, and on the right, the bridge is leading us to Miami Beach. The area that we're concerned about here is the space with the black box around it. Under this part of the causeway, a group of reentering sex offenders were required for a point in time to live under the bridge due to the increased residency restrictions that were present at both the state and local level in Florida. The area was nicknamed Bookville after Ron Book, who crafted the state and county laws pertaining to sex offenders. I actually have posted a video clip on Blackboard, and you'll meet Ron Book in that video clip. So what's so special about this bridge? Well, reentering sex offenders were basically required to live underneath the causeway in the hot Florida sun with no running water, no electricity, and were supervised under this bridge through the use of ankle monitors and probation check-ins. Basically, they were required to live there because of the way Miami constructed their residency restrictions. It was either live under this bridge or live in a multi-million-dollar high-rise, neither of which is a perfect option for a returning inmate. This picture shows the shanty town that was developed under the bridge. You can see here that there's some tents, there's a few RVs, there's some plastic tarps around, and whatever else sort of could be used to create a makeshift little house. This is the area that the offenders were living in. Here's another view of the overpass and some of the tents that are located underneath it. People probably were going that high in order to try and keep cool and be in the shaded part more. You can see that the residents have left graffiti messages addressing the conditions that they're living under. You can see things like "they don't want us to make it," and "no more pain," and "this is inhumane." The offenders are clearly addressing their frustration and anger over the situation that they're living in. This is an alternative view of the bridge from the side. You will see Miami is right across the bay, and with it comes multi-million-dollar high-rises and an expensive way of living. The high-rises were available to the sex offenders, but if you've been in prison for X amount of years, you can't afford to live there. Right across the bay, you have people living in squalor underneath the bridge. You can see in this picture that there's piles of trash on the side by the water, and you can imagine the smell that's put out from all of that garbage in the middle of the summer. That's gotta be a disgusting smell. Here's another picture of the compound. You'll notice that the offenders have tried to create a little makeshift bathroom here. There's even a little utility sink and some lockers for them to be able to keep their items secure. And there's a little shelf that has a few items on it as well, and a little table. But even with these efforts, it's still apparent that these individuals are living underneath a bridge, and it doesn't make it that much better. Here's a resident, and I want you to note that the ankle monitor he is wearing. Either he's being supervised by radio frequency or GPS monitoring under the bridge, but this compound is so official and recognized by the state that the actual residents are being hooked up to their monitors so that they are required to be in the vicinity of the bridge. That is in a very official sanction. Finally, you're going to see the last picture I have for you, and this is a picture of another resident living under the bridge named Homer Barkley, and this is a picture of his driver's license. You'll notice that on the official license that was issued by the state of Florida, that his address is listed as the Julia Tuttle Causeway in Miami, Florida. But what else do you see on this driver's license on the lower right-hand corner? You'll notice the numbers 943.0435 Florida statute, or FS as it's listed on the driver's license. This designates Mr. Barkley as a sex offender pursuant to Florida statute 943.0435. That's the statute in Florida that requires sex offenders to register with the state, or they're going to face a penalty of incarceration for no more than 1 year. This is known as failure to register. Sex offenders in the state of Florida are identified as such on their actual driver's licenses. This picture once again solidifies the official nature of the Bridge Colony by the address listed on Mr. Barkley's driver's license, and it also shows us state regulations that are used in an effort to identify offenders. On the Blackboard website, I have provided you with another video link that shows what the colony was like while it was in existence. The sex offender colony was disbanded in 2009, and the offenders were forced to relocate. You may ask, where? Really, they were forced to relocate anywhere that they could find that did not violate terms of the residency restrictions. But in the video, you'll see how the colony was started, the man responsible for its existence were on book, and what it was like to live underneath the bridge. So go ahead and watch that video and then come back and finish watching this one. As you can see from our discussion and from the video, the secondary video rather, that you have watched, life as a re-entering sex offender is very difficult. However, life as a re-entering offender in general is difficult all on its own. Not only is it a difficult prospect for the offender who's trying to do it, but for community members as well, as they're often leery about whether or not a re-entering offender should actually be welcomed home. The offenders are coming back to the community, but they're now living among people who might not want them there. But when you ask community members about it, they are expressing some feelings on the topic. Some are concerned about living so close to these offenders, and others are afraid about the many new convicts that are being released every year. But really, how many of us are aware when people are released and re-enter unless you have a reason to? If you lived in a smaller town, then you probably would be more aware of re-entry than you would someplace larger where these offenders are just another number. When you ask folks about rehabilitation and re-entry services, people seem to favor them quite a bit. There is an 8-to-1 in favor margin regarding rehabilitative services. However, when there is a follow-up question asking whether or not these same individuals would be in favor of increasing taxes with that money specifically going towards re-entry services, then support for these services goes down to 0. People are no longer in support of rehabilitation if they have to pay for it. But without those taxpayer dollars, the annual corrections budget goes down that much further, which then eliminates rehabilitation rather, and that then in turn increases recidivism for those who are failing to re-enter successfully. Without this money, this is a no-win situation. Most inmates are not returning to small towns. They're returning to larger areas where there may be more opportunities for things like employment or housing, but it is also much more expensive to live there, and you're having to compete with all of these other inmates who are returning to those areas as well. As you can see here, more than half of inmates in Illinois are returning to Chicago, more than half in Maryland are returning to Baltimore, and more than 25% in Texas are returning to Houston. That's a large congregation of inmates returning to one area. But what do these areas have in common? Large cities with high ex-offender counts, more resources, but ultimately these areas have more crime as well. However, opportunities, both legitimate and illegitimate, win out each time, and people go where the money is. Employment is one of the most important things for an inmate post-release, but also one of the most difficult things to achieve. Once they disclose that they are a convicted felon, many never get a call back from a potential employer, or they don't know how to get a job because they've been incarcerated so long. They're not as prepared as other applicants, and what types of things do you think they can put on their resume? How do you overcome 10 years of unemployment due to incarceration? So what type of work do you think then most inmates are gravitating towards given their status as an ex-convict? The type that really doesn't ask that many questions. This means construction, fast food, restaurant services, lawn maintenance, and really anything else that isn't highly skilled employment. The last topic of the day focuses on the idea of civic participation. Once convicted of a felony, there are a lot of things that inmates can no longer do. They are now considered civilly dead. In other words, they have been stripped of all ability to participate in the civil process. They're not allowed to own firearms, in many cases vote, serve on a jury, run for office, etc. But voting is the big one. Many states have different time periods in which they no longer allow felons to be able to vote. Some are permanently disenfranchised, while others are allowed to vote as long as they are no longer serving the sentence. However, the idea of losing your right to vote because you have committed a felony is known as felon disenfranchisement. Whether it is permanent or temporary in nature, the amount of felons who have lost the right to vote is staggering. Across the country, this affects about 5.85 million individuals. Imagine how an election could possibly be affected if those individuals were able to cast a vote. But some believe if you have made a mistake or have committed a felony crime, then you should not be able to vote. The issue is that what happens if the felony occurred when you were 20 years old and now you're 40 or 50? Many individuals are not the same people they were when they committed the offense. They have matured, they have more to lose, they aren't doing the same dumb things that they did when they were younger. Some states recognize this and give felons their voting abilities back after the individual has hit a certain milestone. Other states simply disenfranchise you permanently. This last slide shows the country and the state-based disenfranchisement laws. Let's start with the big ones. The states that are in the lighter color orange, these are the permanent ones. Florida, Iowa, Kentucky, and Virginia never let you vote again once you have lost the ability based on a felony conviction. The darker orange states, they actually take time to look at the type of felony conviction. In these states, most often violent felons are disqualified. The lightest blue states allow individuals to vote once they have finished their incarceration sentences. White states only allow probationers. The medium blue states allow probationers and parolees, and the darkest blue states allow anyone and everyone convicted of a felony to vote. It does not matter if you are incarcerated or if you are out on conditional release or you're done with any supervision whatsoever. Those states do not take away your right to vote no matter what the situation is. This lecture was a follow-up look to the work that you've already done focusing on reentry issues. Your group projects looked at the importance